Hello, everyone. This week's first chapter Friday is called Anything But Okay. Um, this is actually a book from our Middle East War section. So, if you are a fan of Alan Gratz or just in general, if you tend to be a World War II reader, you should know that we do have a Middle East Wars section, and it is just a little further down in the bookcase. So, if you want to maybe start branching out and reading about different wars, you will find it there. So, anything but okay, here is the description. Stella and Farida have been best friends since first grade, but lately there's been a tension to their friendship. It all started when Stella's brother came home from his latest tour with the US Marines in Afghanistan. Because the Rob who returned is not the Rob that Stella knows. He's angry and moody and closed off, but Stella doesn't want to talk about it, and Farida can tell she's keeping something from her. Desperate to help Rob and maybe get things back to normal, Stella thinks she just needs to get him out of the house. She definitely didn't expect going to the movies to end with Rob in handcuffs for assaulting one of her classmates after his anger spiraled out of control. When a video of the fight is released, it instantly goes viral, and everyone has an opinion of Stella and her violent vet brother. The entire school takes sides, and the media labels Rob as a radicalized terrorist sympathizer. And even Farida is dragged into the mess despite not being there. As the story continues trending, Stella will have to decide just how far she's willing to go for the truth, even if it means admitting her own mistakes. But when lines are drawn, how do you find courage to face hate? And what does it truly mean to take a stand? So we will start with chapter 1. I feel bad, but in wartime, dying is always a possibility. I'm from a military family, so I know that all too well. My brother Rob left the Marines for civilian life a month and a half ago after serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. During both of Rob's deployments, the fear of him not coming home was constantly at the back of my mind, and often front and center. Now that he's home, well, I'm here with my friends, trying really hard not to think about that. Thinking about Rob is a major downer these days. Sorry, Farida, I say, but that's kind of what happens in war. I bite my lip, remembering about all the times I've freaked out about my brother dying. I know, Stella, but he's home now, she says, getting what I'm not saying. You don't have to worry anymore. That's what you think. I don't tell anyone, even my best friends, that although my brother is back in our house physically, he's not back. Not really. At least, not the same brother he was before his last deployment. It was bad enough after the first deployment. He joined the combat club. My parents were already members. They both served in the Gulf War, dad in the 3D Marines and mom as a Navy surgeon. That makes me the odd one out in the Walker family, the only one who hasn't served our country. It's even worse now, though. This time, he's so different from the brother who left, it's like he was possessed by an alien from one of his favorite sci-fi movies while he was over there. But I came here to forget about that for a while, which I'm obviously not doing very well. Yeah, I say, shrugging. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate Casablanca for the Keeping It Real rankings? I'm thinking a 9, Ken says. It's got meme-worthy lines, great acting, and I'm officially in love with Ingrid Bergman, even though she died before I was born. Does that make me weird? It's okay. We already know you're weird. I tell him it's part of your charm. Gee, thanks, Ken says, tossing a pillow at me. You guys are the best. I laugh and catch the pillow and then ask Farida, so what's your rating? I don't know, she says slowly. I loved it for all the reasons Ken said, but she fiddles with the corner of the pillow she's holding on her lap. But what? Ken asks. Well, it's supposed to be Casablanca in Morocco, which is in North Africa, Farida says, but everyone in the film is white except for Sam, the piano player. Ken gives me a quick glance from the corner of his eye. I wonder if he noticed. I didn't, but that makes me feel like a bad friend. Well, it was filmed in Hollywood in 1942, Ken says. I looked up all this stuff about it before we watched it. You know the scene where they sang La Marseillaise and the people were crying? A lot of the actors were actual refugees from Nazi Germany, so they weren't pretending to cry. Okay, fine. But are you telling me that they could only find one person of color in all of Hollywood in 1942? Farid asked. Just one? Well, yeah, that does kind of seem ridiculous when you think about it, I admit. I feel terrible that I watched the whole movie without even noticing that. That's because white's your default, Farida says, so it's not going to seem out of the ordinary for you the way it does for me. I wonder how many other things are default for me, but Ken is still arguing the race issue. Yeah, but this movie was filmed before the civil rights and all that, Ken says. It's a film of its time. We have to judge it in its historical context. If you're telling me that its historical context, Farida does air quotes with her fingers, means that it was whitewashed, then okay, fine. You're right, I say. I guess I was too caught up in the story to notice. I'm sorry. It's not like I want to be your travel agent for an extended white guilt trip, Farida says, flopping back on the couch. It is a great story, but I just can't turn off noticing when something's not the way it's supposed to be, like you can. Just like I can't turn off having brown skin and dark hair and eyes. And like I was born wearing white girl goggles, I admit. Look, I get what you're saying, Ken says, and I get that it's wrong, but what are we supposed to do about it? He sounds annoyed and defensive. This movie was made before we were even born, he continues, before our parents were born. I'm not even sure my grandparents were born yet. I hope this doesn't turn into an argument like it often does when Farida points out something to do with racism that the two of us have completely missed. If I'm honest, I have to confess that the first time it happened, I was pretty defensive too. I took it personally because I felt like my best friend was calling me a racist. It was in 5th grade, before we started hanging out with Ken. We were having a sleepover at Farida's house and flipping through the channels to see what was on TV. Aladdin, the cartoon movie, was on the Disney Channel. Oh, let's watch that, I said. Ugh, no way, Farida said, skipping past it. It's racist. I stared at her, open-mouthed. What's racist about Aladdin? Well, they sing about the Middle East. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home, Farida said. How would you like it if they sang that about America in a Disney movie? Well, that's different, I said, without a second thought. Frida stared at me, hurt evident in her brown eyes. Different? How? She asked me. Do you think I'm barbaric? And my parents? No, and what about Yusef? He's only 7. Is he barbaric? I was taken aback by how angry and upset she was. I was too clueless to understand both what was wrong with Aladdin and why what I'd said was hurtful. I mean, I'm still clueless sometimes, obviously, but I'm trying to be better. What I felt back then was defensive, like my best friend suddenly thought I was a terrible person. Wait, so you think I'm horrible? I didn't before, she said, but right now, you sound it. I was so upset, I almost called my parents to pick me up and take me home. It was Mrs. El-Rahim who talked us through it. She came in to bring us some baklava and saw that Farida and I were sitting on opposite sides of the room, not talking to each other and looking miserable. Mrs. El-Rahim helped me understand where Farida was coming from. She explained to me that Farida didn't bring up these things because she thought I was a horrible person, but so that I could understand her better. She was trying to help open my eyes to things that I might not notice because I'm from the dominant culture. It was because we were friends that Farida felt she could talk to me about such difficult things, so we could be even better friends, even closer. Then Farida said how hurtful it was when I said, that's different, and I started feeling defensive again, but Mrs. El-Rahim talked us both through that too. I'm not saying it's easy to have these conversations or that my first reaction isn't always to be on the defensive and try to argue about it like Ken is doing now. Ken wants to work in TV or movies someday, so he's really into the history of film. He has had an almost encyclopedic memory of old movies, which he supplements with the rapid use of IMDb and Google to launch the historical context defense whenever Farida makes any comment about lack of genuine representation. It's true that there's historical context, but one thing I've learned from being friends with Farida is that still doesn't make it any better. Farida has gone silent. Ken and I might feel uncomfortable when we're called on having white as our default, but Farida has to live with that being the way things are in pretty much every movie she sees and every book she reads. And in her everyday life, which is way worse. I just want you to notice, she says, finally sitting up. That's all. I'm not an idiot. I know you can't go back and change what's wrong with a classic movie. Well, unless Doctor Who left the TARDIS in Argleton somewhere. But you can change whether you notice it or not. And you can recognize that Hollywood is still making the same mistakes today. For every Black Panther movie, there's like 10 White Spider-Man movies. There's an uncomfortable silence, and I'm holding my breath, hoping that Ken doesn't keep trying to persuade her with historical context and just hears her. Oh, he says, fair enough. I exhale a sigh of relief, and it's not just with movies, Farida adds. Got it, Ken says, and even Farida hesitates. Even what? I ask. Well, like being more aware of stuff that's happening at school. You don't seem to have noticed that there's more than the usual level of we don't like brown people going on since school started this year. I glance over at Ken to see if he knows what Farida means, but he looks just as clueless as I feel. We've only been back at school for like a week. What could we have missed? Like what? He asks. Well, did you hear yesterday that when Dev Iyer showed Isaac Taylor the schematic for his latest robotics project, Scooter Douglas reported him to the school resource officer for building a bomb? What? I exclaimed. That's ridiculous. Between Dev Iyer and Jenny Moss, our school has practically won every robotics prize for the last 2 years. You know that. I know that. Anyone who knows Dev or reads the school newspaper beyond the sports section knows that, Farida says. But there are a lot of people at school who aren't in either category. Do you think Scooter would have reported Jenny Moss for building a bomb? Not likely, Ken says, and that's wrong. Knowing Scooter, he'd probably make some stupid crack about how girls aren't capable of building bombs, I say, or robots for that matter, even though he can't do either himself. Scooter ended up getting himself a 2-day suspension, Farida says. Serves him right, I say. And that's not all. Some of Chris Abbott's friends are taking his dad's anti-immigrant stuff to heart, Farida says. Wade Bowles and Judd Landon told Jonas Ambai that he should go back to his country the other day. Jonas said Chris was right there with them. He might not have said the actual words, but he didn't do anything to stop them. Chris's dad is the mayor of our town, and Chris is my greatest rival at Debate Club. His dad is running for governor of our state on a campaign that appears to consist of telling us that the state's economy is a mess and he's the only one who can fix it, and that immigrants and refugees are to blame. Chris and I don't agree on very much, but Chris is smart, which is more than I can say for some of the guys he hangs around with. No way, I exclaim. Yes way, she says. Like, what, brown people can't be born in the U.S.? Jonas was born here in Virginia. I haven't heard anything like that, Ken says. Farida doesn't say anything, but her silence speaks volumes. Wait, is this another thing I'm not noticing? He asks. Well, it's not like they're going to say any of that stuff to you, Farida says, but if they say it in front of you, I hope you will still notice. Of course I'd notice, Ken says. He sounds really offended. But will you say something? Farida asks. Of course we will, I assure her. You're our friend. We've got your back. Not just if it's me, if it's anyone, she says. Well, yeah, he says slowly. Anyone. Wrong is wrong, I say. Farida leans back against the sofa cushions and smiles. It's good to hear you say that, she says. I keep thinking about Chris and his friends telling Jonas to go back to his country when his country is this country. Where do they get off? I want to talk to mom and dad about it when I get home, but as soon as I walk in the front door, I can tell that something's wrong. Clue number 1. Our dog, Peggy, doesn't greet me like she normally would. Clue number 2. Mom and dad are sitting close together at the kitchen table, speaking in low, clipped voices. The tension is suffocating. I want to turn and go back to Farida's, but she's working a shift at her family's restaurant, Tigress, this evening. So I force myself to walk to the kitchen. Hey, I'm home, I say in a tentative bid for my parents' attention. Hi, Stella, Mom says. Dinner will be ready at 6:30. Why don't you go do your homework? In other words, get lost and let me finish talking to Dad. I'm about to do what she tells me to, even though it's Saturday and my homework's done, when I notice that Dad's icing his hand. What happened? Did you hurt yourself? Dad doesn't answer. If anything, his lips compress into an even thinner line, as if I'm some kind of enemy interrogator instead of his kid wanting to know what's going on. Can someone tell me what's up? I say, because it's pretty obvious something's not right around here. The seconds of silence before Mom finally opens her mouth to speak feel like an eternity. Your brother has been having a difficult time since he got back, she says. Yeah, tell me something I don't know. I really don't need snark on top of everything else right now, Stella, Mom snaps. Sorry, I mumble, but that's a lie. I'm annoyed, not sorry. So what's his problem? We don't know exactly, Mom says, and until we can get him to admit that he's got a problem, we're struggling to figure out how to get him the help he obviously needs. So you're telling me I just have to suffer until he figures it out, I say. Stella, the world doesn't revolve around you, Dad says. It's something we all have to learn sooner or later. You might as well learn it now. My parents have no clue. They just don't. Dad, I already know that. In this family, the world revolves around Rob. With that, I storm out of the room and head upstairs. I get better answers from stupid Siri than my parents these days. And that is chapter 1. So if that sounds like something you are interested in reading, be sure to stop by the library and check out our Middle East War section.